Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me tonight. Brukim Habayim. Thank you very much for coming for the learning of Parashat Shavua, Parashat Behar. Got a lot of important things to talk about tonight. Be'ezrat Hashem, we're going to be dedicating tonight's learning, first of all, for the Hatzlacha of Am Yisrael, for the speedy and safe retrieval of all the hostages, and for the refuah shlema of kol cholei Israel, especially Menachem and Khurshid, and anybody who needs a refuah shlema should have it. Anyone who needs to find their shidduch should get it, B'ezrat Hashem, very soon. And we should have only good news for all of Am Yisrael, B'ezrat Hashem. So tonight, I'd like to begin with the beginning of the parasha. Talks about Shemitah. I've got a few subjects I want to cover tonight, B'ezrat Hashem. There's so many important things. There's so many things to speak about. But let's just talk about a couple of subjects, B'ezrat Hashem. So first of all, the parasha starts off talking about the mitzvah of the Shemitah. The mitzvah of Shemitah, as you know, is a mitzvah where for an entire year, anybody who has a farm or a tree of any sort cannot do any work on his farm. He cannot plant. He cannot plow. He cannot harvest the fruits that grow. And if he has them already, he can't sell them. There are many different things that he cannot do with the land. It is a Shnat Shabbaton Tihiyeh La'aretz. It's a year that is a sabbatical year for the land, which means it is a year that no work shall be done to this land. It's a Shabbat for the land. Just like we have a Shabbat every 7 days, so too the land has a Shabbat every 7 years. That is the way the Torah sets it up. Now, the reason that this is so significant, well, there are a number of reasons. The first of them being that the culture of the Jewish people at that time was an agricultural one, which means that that's how they were surviving. They were farmers, and they produced produce and grains and wheat and grapes and olives, and they made wine out of them. They made bread out of them. They sold them. That's how they survived. So to tell somebody for an entire year not to go to work and not to earn his livelihood requires a tremendous amount of emunah, a tremendous amount of faith. And that's what the Jewish people were told to display during this year, to have faith in what the Torah says, that whatever is going to happen is, in other words, whatever is going to be will be for their benefit. They're going to have enough in the 6th year to provide for the 6th year, 7th year, and the 8th year, so that they have all of this, right, for them, and everything should be blessed for them, right? But that requires a lot of faith. And the truth is, as an aside, this is one of those beautiful proofs to the fact that Torah is true. Torah is emet, because if this were to be written by some human being, God forbid to even mention such a thing, but if it was written by a human being, then to make such a promise would be incredibly silly. In other words, if a human being wrote the Torah, like so many people think, unfortunately, then how could somebody be so silly to say that if you keep the Shemitah, you'll have enough blessing the 6th year, the 7th year, and the 8th year, right? If it doesn't work out like that, then guess what? It's proof that your whole religion is a farce, and therefore there's no point in following anything else. The fact that the Torah goes out on a limb and makes that statement and is confident to make that statement and says, just do it and you'll see. You don't have to believe me. Just follow the rules, you'll see. You'll have for the 6th year, the 7th year, and the 8th year. That's proof that it's divine, right? Because no other entity could make such a promise. But besides for that, there's another very important lesson. Besides for the emunah, and besides for the fact that it helps us to reinforce our belief that Torah is true and it's from Hashem, but there's another very important lesson from the Shemitah that I think is so important to remember. We forget it far too often. In our culture today, in America, we like to view ourselves based on our work. In other words, our self-image has to do with the kind of job that somebody has. If somebody works as a janitor, we view him in one way. Somebody works as a garbage man, we view him in a different way. Somebody's a lawyer, we view him differently. Somebody is in real estate, we view him differently, right? This one requires this kind of knowledge, this one requires that type of knowledge, this kind of street smart, that kind of lack of knowledge, etc., and etc. We view people based on their job. And what's important for us to remember, the Shemitah comes and tells you, look, remember, the whole Jewish people, they were all farmers at this time. This is how they had sustenance. So all of a sudden we tell them, hey, you don't work for a whole year. You're sitting at home and you're not going to lift a finger for your job. You're not going to the fields to harvest. You're not going to plant. You're not going to do anything, right? So what are you doing? Oh, so now I have time to focus on what really counts, which is Torah and mitzvot. Now I have time to learn more. Now I have time to spend more time with my family. Now I have time to connect with Hashem. Okay, so that's what it's all about. That's real life, right? That's the idea. Remember, we forget that money and the going ahead and gaining of that money is a means. It's not a goal. Sometimes we forget about that. The Shemitah is here to remind us of that. Shemitah is here to say, hey, take a break. Take a break. Remember, you are not your job. You are a Jew, and your job is to be a Jew, to be the best kind of Jew that you could be. That's your job. How do you achieve that mission in life? Well, you need to have a parnasah. You need to have sustenance, right? You need to be able to have sustenance. Okay, but is the sustenance, is the livelihood that I'm earning, is that my goal in life? Is that my mission in life? No, that's not my mission in life. My mission in life is to be the best Jew that I could be. And being the best Jew that I could be means being a good father, being a good husband, being a good friend, being a good neighbor. Besides for that, it means wearing tefillin. It means doing chesed. It means keeping Shabbat. It means doing all of the things that a Jew is supposed to do in order to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Shemitah is here to remind us, okay, everybody, now you get to take a break from work. Now you get to take a break. You are not work. Work is not you. Who are you? A piece of Hashem. And your job is to try and reconnect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu while you're still in your physical body to elevate it. That's your job. Shemitah reminds us that's our real job. The farming and all the work that we do, it helps us to do our job, but that's not our main goal. And therefore, it's important to remember that before we get caught up in lifestyle and cars and money and houses and we're so into all that stuff. Shemitah helps us to remind us what really matters. That's number one. Now, number two. In the parasha, later on, we find a very, very powerful message. And that is from the sugya that talks about ribit. Ribit is, as you know, a commandment against usury, which means that you are not allowed to lend your fellow Jew, let's say $5, and ask in return for $6. Okay? Can't do that. Now, in the middle of that discussion, okay, the Torah says 3 words. V'chei achicha imach. I'll read it to you inside. It says, V'chi amuf achicha, when your brother becomes poor, umatay yado imach, and he's now asking you for help, ger v'toshav v'cha imach, whoever it may be. It could be your brother, it could be somebody who's a foreigner living in your land. Al tikach mito nesher, right? Do not take from him interest, v'tarbit, or increase your money through interest. You shall fear your God. Now 3 words, v'chei achicha imach, and your brother shall live with you. Okay. Now those 3 words, if you look in the Gemara in Masechet Bava Metzia Daf Samech Bet Amud Aleph, which it just so happens to be our daily Gemara morning Gemara is going to be learning this soon. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan explained that v'chei achicha imach refers to the following scenario. The following scenario came up. It says like this. It's a beraita, and it's an argument between Rabbi Akiva and Ben Petura. It says the following: Shnaim she'ayu me'alchim baderech. 2 men were walking on the way. וביד אחד מהן קיתון של מים. And in one of them, there was a jug of water. Now, one of them has a jug of water, the other one does not. Im shotim shnehem metim. If they both drink, they both die. Ve'im shoteh echad mehem. If one of them drinks, then, or if he drinks his own water, then magia la'yishuv. He will reach the inhabited area and he'll get to survive. דרש בן פטורה מוטב שישתו שניהם וימותו ואל יראה אחד מהם במיתתו של חברו. So Ben Petura's opinion was they should both drink and both die. Let not one see the death of his other fellow. עד שבא רבי עקיבא, and then came along Rabbi Akiva and he said that's a mistake. ולימד וחי אחיך עמך. The Torah in this week's parasha says your brother shall live with you. With you means that you have to be first. In other words, your brother should live on condition that you live. Says Rabbi Akiva, chayecha kodmim lechayecha vercha. Your life comes before the life of your fellow. So this teaches us that, of course, while the Torah demands that we try and save our fellow's life, like we learned in previous parashot, lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, you're not allowed to just watch your friend drown in the river and not do anything. You have to do something to try and save him. That's, of course, a mitzvah in the Torah. However, although that may be the case, nevertheless, the Torah says, chayecha todmim lechayecha vercha. Your life comes before your fellow's life. You have to address your needs first. If you give him that water, and that means you're going to die, then the Torah says to you, you're doing the wrong thing. You have to address yourself first and take care of your needs first. Now, the reason it's so important to understand this is because many times in life, we have certain considerations that we make calculations and we make decisions based on those types of considerations about, for example, what will so-and-so think? What will so-and-so feel if I do this, if I do that, etc. Meanwhile, it could be a decision that's very damaging and very harmful to, let's say, either you, yourself, maybe to your wife, or maybe to your child, right? For example, somebody called me up this week and said, look, I want to switch my child to your school. And I said, okay, very good. What's the hesitation? And this person told me, well, there's this other person that will be very offended if I do that, and they will be very frustrated if I do that, etc., etc. But I just don't think that other place together with that person is the right fit for my child. I think my child, it's a disservice to my child, but I can't do it. I'm having a hard time. So I quoted to this person this Gemara. The pasuk in the Parashat tells us, you have to do what's best for you. Your life comes before the lives and the considerations of other people. It's important to be thoughtful. It's important not to hurt anybody's feelings. That's true. But if it's coming at the expense of your life, right? And there's no question that developing life skills and developing a person's skill set and ability to survive as an adult, etc., that is chayecha kodmim. You have to address your needs and the needs of your children first before anybody else. For anybody, they come first, right? You come first. That's the key to understanding this line over here. And many times, people find themselves doing what's not good for themselves because of certain calculations, but they actually find themselves doing harm to themselves. And it's important to remember, the Torah says, chayecha kodmim. Your life comes first. And that could be with anything. It could be if, let's say, a person has a question, should I learn with this person or should I learn with that person? Well, that person might be offended, but I'm not learning as well. That guy is sitting there and he wants to talk about the Knicks the whole time instead of learning the Gemara. So that's not for me. Well, he's going to be offended. What can I do? Chayecha kodmim. I have X amount of time in the day to learn. I can't waste it on talking about the Knicks. I have to learn. So my life comes first. It's important. There are many, many such examples. But it's important to be aware of the concept. Chayecha kodmim. Your life comes first. It's important to understand that's the Torah outlook on things. We don't say that's at least Rabbi Akiva's approach, and that's the halacha. We don't say both of you should drink and die, but rather, your brother should live, imach, but first you have to be there too. He has to be there with you. Not that you're not there and you're losing out and you're suffering because of your considerations for him. That doesn't work like that. Okay, that's another very beautiful lesson from the parasha this week. Now, the subject that I wanted to focus on tonight, for a little bit longer than what we did until now, is actually a mitzvah that is not so well known from this parasha. If you look in the Sefer HaChinuch, it's mitzvah Shin Lamed Aleph, mitzvah number 331 out of the 613. Sefer HaChinuch counts it as that number mitzvah. And it's the mitzvah of blowing shofar on Yom Kippur of Yovel. So that means there's a mitzvah called Yovel, which is the Jubilee year. Every 7 Shemitah cycles, 49th year of Shemitah is followed by the 50th year, also known as the Jubilee year, Yovel. Now, during Yovel, we're going to read in the parasha, lots of things happen. Ancestral homelands that belong to a certain family and a certain tribe, they go back. They go back to that tribe. So if, let's say, he sold you a field in his ancestral homeland, you are aware of the fact that if, let's say, it's 35 years away from the Jubilee year, 35 years from now, you're giving it back. So it's as if it's not really a sale. It's like a 35-year lease. It's going back to him. Furthermore, any Jewish slave goes free at this time. So if, let's say, you had a slave that worked for you for 6 years, he was a Jewish slave, and then he says, I don't want to stop being your slave. I like working here. I would rather be here, and I like the wife that you gave me. You gave him a Kanani slave woman as a wife, and he has children with her. And he says, I want to keep living like this. So at that point already, we say that that he goes to the doorpost. They pierce his ear, and then he stays leolam. He stays as your slave forever. What does it mean forever? Until the Jubilee year. Right? Until the Jubilee year, until Yovel. Now, but when does it actually happen? So over here, the pasuk tells us that they go free when they blow the shofar on Yom Kippur. Okay? So this is on Yom Kippur of the Yovel. So it's only on Yom Kippur of a Jubilee year. They will be blowing the shofar, and then the slaves go free. Okay? So this is what happens. Now, the question is like this. What is the idea of blowing the shofar for this purpose? You're trying to tell me right now that you have to blow the shofar on the Yom Kippur of the Jubilee year, right? And you have to do it so that it should be clear that now the slaves are going free. What's the purpose of blowing shofar for this? Shofar is a very powerful tool. It seems a little bit interesting that we're going to use this on Yom Kippur specifically in order to announce that the slaves are going free. The Sefer HaChinuch has a very interesting take on this, and I'll share with you what he says. He says the following: Ve'inyan shiluach ha'eved she'avad et adonav zman rav. He says the idea that you're going to send free your slave who served his master for a long time. It's a very difficult thing to do, to send away a slave. He's been working for him for 35 years, let's say. Right? Al ken leorer lev haberiot. For this reason, the Torah wants to awaken the hearts of the people about this matter. Ulchazek nafsham, and to strengthen their souls. Ulehazhiram, and to warn them ala mitzvah, about performing this mitzvah. How so? Beshomam, when they hear. Kol shofar, the sound of the shofar. Birotam, when they see. Ki hadavar shaveh hu bechol haaretz. The shofar is being blasted around the entire land. This is not the only place they're blowing shofar. Everywhere in the whole country they're blowing shofar on Yom Kippur of Yovel, of the Jubilee year. V'shehakol osim ken. Everybody is doing it. Everybody is in the same boat. We're all setting our slaves free, right? So therefore, nitztavinu al zeh. We have been commanded about this. How so? She'en davar shechazek libot bnei adam. Says the Sefer HaChinuch. Listen to the words so carefully, because there is nothing shechazek libot bnei adam that will strengthen the hearts of people kemo ma'aseh rabim, like the actions of the masses, of the many. Ukema'amar chacham, just like the wise man once said, Tsa'ar rabim nechama. The suffering of the public is actually a consolation. When I know that it's not just me, when I know that it's not just me going through this hardship, it's not just me that has to set away his slave that's been working for him for 20, 30, 40 years. I know that it's me and it's my neighbor and it's his neighbor, and we're all going through this together. So that is going to help me. It's going to push me to follow through on what it is that I'm supposed to do. It's so much easier to cope when you know that you are not the only one going through something. Rabotai, that's a very fundamental message from the Sefer HaChinuch. So it's basically another way of saying Yom Kippur is the time that everybody is there, everybody is gathered together, and there's nobody who's going to miss this message. Everybody is hearing the same message, which is that we are all setting our slaves free. Rabotai, this is the reason that we have so many of these groups that are so successful, the various support groups when it comes to, let's say, weight loss, drug addiction, people that suffer from problems with infertility, or people who are divorced and they need a shoulder to cry on, or all these different groups. People feel so much better knowing that they're not suffering alone and that they can help each other out. And I think that Chazal have put this term into a few words called Noseh be'ol im chavero. When somebody is there to share the burden together with you and to tell you that I'm by your side and you're not suffering alone and I am here for you, I'm here to support you. So then it's much easier for the people to go through what they're going through. To know that somebody there is by your side supporting you, it goes a very long way, and it helps you to survive. It helps you to cope, and it helps you to do what is right for you to do, to help yourself. So I noticed that if you look in Pirkei Avot in the 6th chapter, there's a list in the 6 chapters, in the 6th chapter, of 48 different things that are needed in order to acquire Torah knowledge. It's called Memchet Kinyanei Torah, the 48 different things that are necessary in order for a person to acquire Torah knowledge. And if you look in that list, you'll see that for a person to acquire Torah knowledge, one of the things he needs is to be Noseh be'ol im chavero, which means he needs to be able to shoulder the burden of somebody else's trouble. He has to be able to stand by his friend in his time of need, to feel the pain of another Jew. That's required in order to be able to have Torah knowledge. And I saw a beautiful piece from Harav Volbe, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Rav Volbe wrote in his Alei Shur something fantastic, and I want to share it with you. He says something really amazing. The Jewish people at Matan Torah, and obviously I'm talking about this now, by the way, because of the fact that we're heading towards Shavuot and we're heading towards climbing up the spiritual ladder to be able to receive the Torah on Shavuot. So look at what happened when the Jews got the Torah on Shavuot. It says that the Jewish people stood there, and it says the following: Vayir'u et Elokei Yisrael. They saw the God of Israel, meaning the Jewish people at this point are having a vision. They are seeing Hashem, in a sense, as much as you can, as much as a human being could. Vayir'u et Elokei Yisrael. They see the God of Israel. V'tachat raglav, and under his legs, kema'aseh livnat hasapir, there was something that looked like a brick of sapphire. Sapphire is sapphire, and the levena is a brick. Uchetzem hashamayim latohar. And it was like the purest heaven, meaning in the sense of purity. It was totally pure. There's no imperfections. Now, over here, Rashi informs us that what is this brick that we're talking about? So Rashi says, Hi hayta lefanav bish'at shi'abud. This brick, Hashem is showing the Jewish people, his legs are resting on that brick, meaning that was the brick that was in front of Hashem the whole time the Jews were slaves in Egypt. In other words, Hashem had in front of him a brick to remember the suffering of the Jewish people in Egypt. He understood, obviously, HaKadosh Baruch Hu understands everything, but Hashem knew that the Jews needed to go through this suffering for whatever the reason was. But still, Hashem was going through the same suffering with us. He was suffering because of the fact that we were suffering. Okay? That's what Rashi says over here. Lizkor tzaratan, to remember the suffering shel Israel, shayu mishuabadim, that the Jews were suffering and because they were enslaved b'maaseh levidim, in the production of bricks. So Hashem is showing them this vision to tell them, as you were suffering in Egypt, I had a brick with me the whole time to remember your suffering. I was suffering together with you. Now, it goes on to say, but this brick was shining. What does it mean this brick was shining? Says Rashi, from the moment that they were redeemed, there was light and rejoicing before Hashem. So I've had this brick with me the whole time that you were slaves in Egypt. And now that you are not slaves in Egypt, now that you are freed, I have this shining brick, meaning that now it's shining. Now I'm so happy. I'm rejoicing that you are no longer suffering. So he was with us in our pain, and he rejoices with us in our freedom. And by the way, for those of us who were preparing for Pesach, and when we spoke about this, we remember that we were talking about the Midrash that said that Rachel, the daughter of Metushelach, or the great-granddaughter of Metushelach, was in the mortar. If you remember, we spoke about the idea that a cement truck continues to move so that the cement doesn't harden. So Rachel, the daughter of Metushelach, and her husband were inside of the mortar, rotating the big stick. This is the Midrash that tells us this. And she was 9 months pregnant, and the Egyptians, Yimach Shema, made her do this back-breaking labor. And unfortunately, she gave birth inside of the cement, and the baby died. And it says the Malach took that baby all the way up to Hashem. And as, unfortunately, the baby was hardened inside of the brick, that was the brick, says the Midrash, that Hashem took under his feet. And from that moment, Hashem said, enough is enough, and the redemption began. So over here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is really involved in the details, in the every step of the way, all the suffering, every little bit of suffering. Hashem is saying, I'm going through it with you. I'm not just watching it and just sitting here. No, I'm suffering together with you. And when you're freed, I'm happy for you. Now, asks Rav Volbe, why is it that if Hashem has one message to tell the Jewish people at the time that he's revealing himself to the Jewish people before he gives them the 10 Commandments, or at the moment that he's giving it to them, why is it that this is the message? Says Rav Volbe, such an important point, because Hashem is telling us, you want to be able to receive the Torah Kedosha, you want to be able to understand the Torah Kedosha, then there's one thing that you need to understand. And that is that in order to get the Torah Kedosha, in order to be able to understand it, you have to be a noseh be'ol im chavero. You must be someone who shares the burden of somebody else, who's able to shoulder that burden together with them, who's able to share the suffering of somebody else, not just to watch and to say, oh, wow, thank God that's not me, but rather to be there for that person. That's what it takes in order to be a Ben Torah, somebody who understands the Torah and loves it and learns it. That's the message that Hashem has for the Bnei Israel. As a matter of fact, Rav Wolbe goes on, and he says, look, what's the first thing that Hashem tells Moshe when they meet for the first time? Moshe Rabbeinu comes to the burning bush, and he doesn't know what's going on. And Hashem starts to speak to Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe says, if they tell me, they ask me, who sent you? What should I say? So Hashem says, Aleph, He, Yud, He, which is Hashem's name. Ehe, and then Yeh, Asher Ehe, Yeh. That's what he said. I will be that which I will be. Now, Rashi over there asks, what does that mean? I will be that which I will be. What does that mean even? What was that? The question was, what's the name? The answer is Aleph, He, Yud, He, meaning I will be. What does that mean? So Rashi explains that Hashem was telling Moshe Rabbeinu, they are suffering right now. And I'm taking them out. I'm sending you. But I want you to tell them that throughout all the future generations, even if there will be a time where they will be suffering again, and then again, I want them to be aware of the fact that I will be there with them, suffering with them every single time. I will never detach myself from the Jewish people. Never. I will be there in their suffering. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu had a pretty practical response. Moshe said, okay, but it happens to be that that's kind of a maybe not such a pick-me-up type of a message, because they're suffering now. I'm saving them, then I'm telling them they're going to suffer again. Maybe that's kind of defeating. It's going to kill their spirit. But be it as it may, the first thing that Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu is, I have this message I want you to convey to the Jewish people. I will never leave them. I will always be with them. And even in the times that they're suffering, I am suffering with them just as much. So says Rav Wolbe, beautifully, now we understand where the source of this mitzvah comes from. As you know, every mitzvah has to have a source. Where in the Torah does it say that you have to do this for your fellow? Answers Rav Wolbe, it says it when it says in the Torah, Vehalachta bidrachav, which means you shall go in the ways of Hashem. It says, just like Hashem comforts mourners, you have to comfort mourners. Just like Hashem visits the sick, you have to visit the sick. Just like Hashem is merciful, you have to be merciful. So over here, we can add another one. Just like Hashem is noseh be'ol im chavero, just like Hashem is an entity, is Hashem that shares the burden of somebody else's pain. He shares the suffering with the other person. He's together with him and he's there as a support. So too, you have to do the same thing to be like Hashem, to be godly. And that over here is the reason why we blow shofar on Yovel of Yom Kippur, on Yom Kippur of Yovel. Because by us blowing that shofar, we are reminding that fellow slave owner that had this Jewish slave who now has to release him. We are reminding him, you are not suffering alone. You are going through something together with everybody else. We're all in it together. We're sharing the burden together. We are united as one. So that helps him to go through what he's going through. So, Rabotai, it's so important. I want to share with you just a perspective. Look at the words of the great Reb Chaim Volozhiner. Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Chaim Volozhiner was the famous Talmud of the Vilna Gaon. He wrote the famous work Nefesh HaChaim. He was the Rosh Shiva of Volozhin. He was, one of the most incredible and genius Geonim that we had in Klal Yisrael. And Reb Chaim Volozhiner, in the introduction to the book, written by his son, Reb Yitzchak Volozhiner, Reb Yitzchak Volozhiner writes that his father I'll read to you the words. He says like this, my father, he says, he would always rebuke me, and he would tell me, he would see that I'm not participating in the suffering of another person. This is what he would always tell me. Listen to these words, so powerful. Sheze kol ha'adam. This is the entire man. Lo le'atzmo nivra. He was not created for himself. Rak leho'il la'acharine. He was created in order to give benefit to others. Kechol asher yimtza b'kochol la'asot. As much as he is capable of doing. That's the whole purpose of why we're here, to give benefit to others. Meaning, to think of other people. And again, this doesn't contradict chayecha kodmim like we said before. Your life comes first. You have to ensure that you're able to do all these things, that you have what you need to do all these things. But once you're set up and you're good, don't just think about yourself. Think about others. That's why we're here, says Reb Chaim Volozhin. You must think about, that's the whole man. Lo la'atzmo nivra rak leho'il la'acharine. He wasn't created for himself, but rather he was created to benefit other people. Abotai, this is of tantamount importance. It's the whole purpose of man. I believe I've shared with you the story with the Flatbush Jewish Journal, I think it was, that put out a survey. They went to different rabbis and they asked them one question. They said, if you could pick a person, any personality from the last 1,000 years and put him at your table, who would it be? So many people answered. I don't know if it was rabbis or different personalities they went and asked around New York. And many people said the Rambam. They would love to have the Rambam at their table. Many people said Rashi. You know, there are all kinds of different personalities and famous people that the Jewish people were involved in that were major influences on Jewish history, and they all had beautiful different answers. They asked Reb David Feinstein this question. Zecher Tzadik Livracha, the son of Reb Moshe Feinstein. And Reb David Feinstein said, you know who I would bring to my table? The hungriest man in the last 1,000 years. That's who I'd bring to my table. In other words, when I want the Rambam to come to my table, I want Rashi to come to my table. That means I want the honor, I want the respect, I want the great experience of having a closeness with the Rambam for an hour, half an hour, whatever it may be. It's a benefit for me. But Reb David, Zecher Tzidkei, his answer was no. My job is to do good for others, is to share the burden of others. So what I would look for is an opportunity to give to somebody else. That's the way an Adam Gadol thinks. To share in the burden of somebody else, to look for an opportunity to share in somebody else's burden. And that's the message that Hashem wanted us to understand and to receive before Matan Torah. All of us have that ability. I think that it's very much within reach. It's just something we have to be a little bit more cognizant of. A person sometimes could be going through troubling times. Maybe the husband's business isn't doing so well, and they're having some issues, and you send them over a nice pot of, I don't know what, gourmet sabzi, soup, something. Maybe you send over a bouquet of flowers to cheer them up, to make them feel good, to make them feel loved, to make them feel special. You invite them over. You are sharing in their burden. You're able to identify that something here is an issue. There's some kind of a problem, whatever it may be. You're there to help. You're there to share, to go through it together, to let this person remember that that person is not alone. In this world, it's so easy to feel alone and isolated. In today's world, it's so common, unfortunately, for people to feel like everybody else, although it's very fake, sadly, like everybody else has everything except for me. I don't have this. I don't have that. And I'm looking at this person online, his post, that post. People feel very isolated. They feel like they're missing things. It's important for us to understand a lot of people are suffering in many different ways. Some of them not such real ways, but some in very real ways. And it's important for us to think about them. That's our job, says Reb Chaim Volozhin. That is man's entire purpose. Rav Shach, Zecher Tzidkei Livracha, there's an amazing story about him, which is that when he came to Israel, he came on a boat. And there was one fellow that did not have his papers with him. Now, the British were in control of Israel at the time. In order to be granted entry into Israel, you needed to have your papers. You can't come into the country and you don't have your papers. So they were giving this guy a hard time, and they told him, look, we're very sorry, but we're sending you back to the country that you came from. He said, what? How could that be? I just came here on this huge journey all the way from Europe, and now you're sending me back? I can't do that. And Rav Shach saw this guy's situation. So Rav Shach told everyone on the boat. He went around to each and every person. And I want you to know, Rav Shach at this time was not known to be a Torah giant. He was not known to be the leader of the Jewish people. He was a wonderful rabbi from Europe that had a good reputation, but it wasn't like everybody knew who he was or something like that. Nobody realized that this was going to be the Gdol Ador. However, the story was, he went and he told everyone on the boat, nobody get off this boat unless they let this man come with us. Those are his words. None of us are getting off the boat. Nobody's leaving unless he gets off the boat too. Nobody knew who he was, but the man took charge. He saw there was another Jew suffering, and he doesn't just turn away. He says, this guy is going through a real problem. What can I do to help him? That's how a Gadol thinks. We don't think like that. We think, how can I get out of this faster? I'm late for my meeting. I have this to do. I have that to do. And this guy is a problem. How come he didn't bring his papers? He should have brought his papers. What was he thinking? You're coming across the world and you don't have a way to get in? What was the plan? You get mad at him for delaying you. You got a bar mitzvah you have to reach. That's how we would think. Rav Shach says, no. Here's a person. He's suffering. He's suffering. What can we do to help him? That's the way a Gadol thinks. You take charge for the sake of another Jew. All of us can lend a helping hand. Even at home, my wife needs something. What can I do for her? How can I share her burden? I see she's stressed out. I see that she's having a hard day with the kids. Not easy. The kids were driving her insane. She didn't have a minute to breathe. What can I do for her? Husband came home, long day at work. Stressed. Having a hard time. What can she do for him? To be noseh be'olim chaverot. There's no greater feeling, like the Sefer HaChinuch says, to know that we're in it together, we're not alone. That's the idea, Rabotai. That's the idea. That's what we need. We're going to stop over here, guys. Thank you for joining me tonight. Yizkul HaMitzvot. V'neder, we continue next week. Chazakim u'bruchim. Thank you for joining.